Okay, so we are going to be wrapping up today kind of our study on spiders and on their traits. And so I'm going to read you another story today called Nefertiti, the Spider Knots. This looks like it would probably be a fictional story, right? It's about the jumping spider who learned to hunt in space. But this is actually not a fictional story. This book is a true story about a jumping spider that was sent to the International Space Station as a part of a research project. And this whole idea about having him go do this was brought up by an 18-year-old student. And so he had this idea. He thought that a jumping spider would never be able to catch its prey if it was in the International Space Station where there's not as much gravity, where they appear to be weightless. And so he had this idea and he wanted to test it out. And so NASA and the International Space Station said, we think this is a really good thing to test out. And so this is a true story about Nefertiti. So before we read it, let's make sure we remember some things. So next time you see a spider web, we learn that jumping spiders use their excellent vision to detect their prey and then they pounce on it, right? And we know this is an inherited behavior. They don't have to be taught this. So we also know that in space, objects are almost weightless in like something like the space station, but not completely. So they have a little bit of gravity to them. We would call that microgravity. So we're going to read and see, do we think that the microgravity might affect the jumping spider's ability to hunt and catch its prey? So let's see. Early in 2012, in a greenhouse near Yarnell, Arizona, a Johnson jumping spider laid in an egg sac. About the same time, Stephanie Countryman was looking for a jumping spider to send on a space mission. Scientists hypothesized or predicted that jumping spiders would not be able to hunt in the microgravity of the International Space Station. On Earth, a spider would jump to catch its food and then land on the ground. On the International Space Station, however, there is little gravity to pull them back down. Instead, the spider would just float. The egg sac arrived at Stephanie's office in Boulder, Colorado on Friday afternoon in February of 2012. The package included a bag of fruit fly larvae for the spiderlings to eat. Stephanie placed the spider egg sac and the open bag of fruit fly larvae into a covered box for the weekend. On Monday morning, Stephanie was horrified. Dozens of tiny spiderlings, just the size of a pinhead, had hatched. Almost all of the fruit flies had hatched too, and the mass of flies had killed almost all of the spiderlings. Only 4 jumping spiders were still alive for Stephanie to raise. One day, Stephanie had to choose a spider for the space mission. She chose the largest female spider because her red abdomen was easy to see. She was also the most active spider. They named her Nefertiti after an ancient Egyptian queen. Before the experiments could fly on the International Space Station, the spider had to be tested in her special habitat or home. The spider's home measured 6 feet wide, or 6 inches wide by 5 inches high by 3 inches deep, about the size of a man's hand. The spider habitat had a chamber for water. Other chambers held fruit flies, which Nefertiti would hunt and eat for her 100 days in space. So there you can see a picture of what her habitat would look like. Okay. So you can see where her water would be, where her fruit fly chamber would be. There's 3 of those. And then you can see with this would be her areas to hide. And this is kind of what she would look like. For the first survival test, Nefertiti lived for a week with no light. That was hard because she only hunted by day. Later, she spent a week in extreme cold. The light and cold test didn't bother Nefertiti, so scientists agreed Nefertiti would be a spider knot. In July, Stephanie fed Nefertiti until she was gorged and her abdomen was big. She wouldn't eat again until she reached the space station. Stephanie took Nefertiti in her habitat and flew from Colorado to Japan, and then they traveled to the island of Tanegashima. There, on July 17th, Nefertiti was handed over to the Japanese Space Agency. They packed Nefertiti and her equipment first into container number 1094 and then onto the HTV-3, an unmanned cargo carrier. Rain poured on July 21st, but the HTV-3 launched anyway. Stephanie wondered, would the Spidernaut return to Earth alive? Six days later, the HTV-3 berthed or attached onto the International Space Station. The spider experiment was unpacked. Nefertiti got her first look at Sunita, or Suni Williams, a captain in the U.S. Navy. The astronaut who would care for her. First, Suni unpacked and set up her habitat. Nefertiti and the fruit flies floated about. As usual, Nefertiti spun a silk line and attached it to the wall as a tether. She leapt for a fruit fly. On Earth, Nefertiti jumped in an arc and almost never missed her prey. But in the microgravity of the International Space Station, she hung almost weightless in midair, just as the scientists had predicted. Hungry, she tried again and missed. For 3 hours a day, Stephanie watched video feed from the space station and she worried. Clinging to the balsa wood walls, Nefertiti ran around looking for food. On July 24th, Nefertiti stalked a fruit fly. This time, instead of leaping in an arc, she lunged in a straight line, and she caught the fruit fly. The hypothesis was wrong. The Johnson jumping spider did adapt to microgravity. Nefertiti learned to jump in a new way to catch her food. Even more surprising, a few days later, Stephanie saw Nefertiti hunt again. This time, she anchored her dragline and leapt for a fruit fly in midair. She caught the fly, and like a bungee cord, her dragline pulled her back to the habitat's wall. Nefertiti was hunting as no other jumping spider had ever hunted before. After 2 weeks of videotaping, the experiment was officially over. However, it would be 11 more weeks before a space capsule could return Nefertiti to Earth. Suni kept Nefertiti's habitat near her work desk. She often stopped to watch the spider hunt and eat, and the spider often stopped to watch Suni moving around. Sometime late in September, Nefertiti caught and ate the last fruit fly in her habitat. Now, she lived on just water. Meanwhile, the International Space Station flew around and around Earth. In all, Nefertiti circled Earth about 1,584 times. And this is what the International Space Station looks like floating in Earth, or around Earth. Over a month later, on October 27th, Suni packed Nefertiti in her habitat for the return trip to Earth. Suni wrote in her NASA blog, "Hang in there are many fruit flies on Earth." The Dragon capsule splashed down on October 28th in the Pacific Ocean near Long Beach, California. When Stephanie opened the habitat, Nefertiti was alive, but barely. Somehow, during the return trip, her water compartment had been closed off. Immediately, Stephanie gave Nefertiti a wet cotton ball, and the spider drank and drank. So this is what her parachute would have looked like as she landed in the ocean. Back in Colorado, Nefertiti had one last test. Would she be able to readapt to Earth's gravity and hunt? She'd lived for over 40 days with no food. Her abdomen was almost flat. A fruit fly buzzed around the spider's habitat. Nefertiti anchored a dragline and sprang. She overshot the fly and slammed into the front window of the habitat. She tumbled to the floor onto her back. She righted herself and lunged again for the fruit fly. She missed. Again she pounced and missed. Desperately hungry, Nefertiti stalked the fruit fly. She crept forward 1 step, 2 steps, and then she leapt and ate. Nefertiti had relearned how to hunt on Earth. For several weeks, Stephanie fattened up the spider knot with small crickets. 9-month-old Nefertiti finally had enough to eat. But a famous spider knot couldn't live on Stephanie's kitchen counter. On November 29th, Nefertiti flew again. This time, she traveled to Washington, D.C., where she would live in the O. Orkin Insect Zoo at the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History. Sadly, on December 3rd, keepers found Nefertiti the spider knot dead of old age. In her 10-month life, Nefertiti traveled over 42 million miles. She hunted on Earth and surprised scientists by hunting successfully in space. Her life and journey built excitement for the space program, and perhaps along the way, she taught some people to appreciate the simple beauty of a spider. So, they had an idea, and Nefertiti was able to figure out how to hunt in space and how to rehunt back on Earth. So there are some questions for you to answer about the story we just read, and feel free to re-listen to it if you need to. And if you have any questions, ask Mr. Rush and I.